Well, happy Monday morning, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are looking at the topic of the man of sin. When you go on YouTube and you do a search for the man of sin 2016, you are going to find, just a plethora of videos there of so-called Bible students telling us that the man of sin, number one, is alive. Number two, that he will be revealed in 2016. Now, that's supposed to be in July. Some say in August. Some say in September. You get differing views about specifically when he's supposed to be revealed. But point of fact is, we're being told the man of sin is alive. Well, you do realize, I hope, that Hal Lindsey, back in the 1980s, said the man of sin was alive, living somewhere in Europe. Tim LaHaye has been telling us for years, man of sin is alive. Well, when we look at Paul's statement in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and we really pay attention to the audience relevance of what he is saying. In fact, when we look at both epistles to the Thessalonians, there is such an overwhelming sense that Paul was speaking not only to the Thessalonians, but about events in their lifetime that he and they believed and expected to be fulfilled in that generation. And folks, look, this is important. It is so common today for Bible students to approach these books as if there's some, quote, mystical, otherworldly works that do not use common language, that do not communicate in common words, that the epistles were not written to real people about real circumstances, but are almost ethereal. They're almost mystical. And that is absolutely a false view. We need to understand that when we are reading the New Testament epistles, we are reading someone else's mail, written 2,000 years ago. That does not mean it has no meaning whatsoever for us today, but it means first and foremost that we must determine what it meant to those people at that time and in those circumstances. A couple of quick examples. Paul had to write to the Thessalonians and comfort them concerning some members of their Christian community who had died before the coming of the Lord. Now, wait a minute. If the coming of the Lord was something that Paul had taught them would not happen, could not happen, probably would not happen for thousands upon thousands of years, why were the Thessalonians so concerned that their loved ones had died before that event? Oh, and by the way, they were probably martyred. But the question of audience relevance, the audience of the imminent expectation of the coming of the Lord, is brought home when we understand that they had such a strong sense of the imminent coming of the Lord that they could believe, and they did believe, that their loved ones who had died, who had been martyred before that event, had perhaps lost out on their reward. No. We must understand the audience relevance of these texts. That's why Paul could write in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 15 and 17, those of us who are, present, active, indicative, alive, and the remaining ones until. He's writing to living, breathing human beings who were alive. He didn't say specifically who would or would not, but he was talking to that generation. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, Paul said, it is a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who are troubling you, those who are persecuting you, and to give to you who are being persecuted relief when the Lord Jesus is revealed. He's writing to people who were being persecuted at that very time. And by the way, I used to believe that Paul was talking about, since he's talking about the man of sin in chapter 2, then he's talking about the man of sin had to be the Roman Catholic Church, persecuting the church, destroyed at the coming of the Lord at the end of time. Folks, it doesn't fit. The Roman Catholic Church did not exist when Paul wrote, and yet Paul says it's a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who are present, active, indicative, troubling you. So Paul is not talking about some far off, far removed, far in the distant future persecution at some so-called end of time. He was talking about a persecution taking place 2,000 years ago against the Thessalonians. And Christ was going to come in judgment of those who are troubling you and to give the Thessalonians, not some future church, but the Thessalonians, relief from that persecution. Now look, the Thessalonians have to be alive at the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. You can't give relief from persecution at the coming of the Lord if at the coming of the Lord the Thessalonians are not under persecution. I mean, it's just impossible. So when we look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and Paul says, brethren, remember, I told you these things when I was with you, and he says that the man of sin was alive in his day, but that he would be destroyed at the coming of the Lord. That's the coming of the Lord of chapter 1. The audience relevance of these texts demand a first century fulfillment. If you want to look at a real, powerful examination of audience relevance in the light of Thessalonians, you need to get my book, In Flaming Fire. This book is a powerful exegesis and exposition of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and you will see how it relates directly to chapter 2 as well as 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Okay? Go to my website, eschatology.org or bibleprophecy.com, and order the book, In Flaming Fire. You'll be glad you did. Thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. We've got more on the man of sin. We'll see you on the flip side.